drive anywhere you like.
Yeah, I think.
Or someone does me.
They predominantly dress as members of the '90s, and the Duxford Aviation Society, stroke the British Airline Collection, the commercial airliners will all be open from
this through the fundraising campaign for NHS charities conceived by John and Amanda Romain of the Aircraft Restoration Company. Spitfire, the PR-11 of the Aircraft Restoration Company. Bouchons, which will be taking the slot after the aeroplane we've just seen get airborne. North American Aviation was tasked by a British purchasing commission with putting forward a proposal for a new fighter to meet a Royal Air Force requirement. The design they came up with was all new. They dubbed it the NA-73, and it had flown by the end of 1940. This at a time when, however, at that stage, it wasn't quite the aeroplane it later became. And this was where, again, British influence played a significant role with the Bouchons takeoff in this airfield. The engine originally chosen for North American's new fighter was the Allison V1710, an outstanding aero engine. Attack sweeps over Germany, Austria and Czechoslovakia at that late point of World War II. Getting airborne off the hard runway now, the Yak-3, that'll be back with us shortly. As I say, the Mustang in those very familiar red tail colours and with trailing smoke, having apparently already been set upon by an Allied fighter. The smoke generator is indicative of the fact that the Bouchon has enjoyed a long post-service career as conflict ended in April 1939, nearly 50 of the 109s started looking for an alternative power plant, and thus began quite a saga. Initially, they hit upon French Hispano-Suiza engines. The Bouchon story had come to a close. But not so. A large number of the ex-Spanish Air Force Bouchons were brought together for the Yak-3 with a higher stalling speed and thus a higher landing speed than other contemporary fighters. Pretty short-ranged as well, but very effective in combat. Quite a lot's been made over the years of Luftwaffe fighter pilots being ordered not to engage Yaks in lower-level dogfights. I've never been quite sure of the truth behind that account, but what is for sure is that this aircraft excelled at the record of the unit that became its most famous operator. Set up 80 years ago this year. Its official title was Régiment de Chasse 3 of the Free French Air Force. It was originally named Normandie, after that region of France, having been established as a means of increasing fraternal ties between the Free French under General Charles de Gaulle and the Soviets in the wake of the German invasion of the USSR. But then, its name was changed to reflect its parts in efforts to liberate areas around the Niemen River before transitioning to the Yak-3. And that regiment, with its French pilots and its Soviet aircraft would notch up 273 confirmed aerial victories against Axis aircraft, of which the last 99 were scored flying Yak-3s. Engine note here to the one. As it taxis in, you'll get a good chance to see the fact that this aircraft is paying its own small tribute to other events of recent months with its Soviet wartime squadron. The sound you can hear is the absolutely marvellous whistle of the de Havilland Goblin turbojet engine and the aircraft it powers, the de Havilland Vampire FB6. Was developed by Frank Halford as the H1 before it was taken over by de Havilland, long an aero engine manufacturer as well as an airframe maker, of course, as the Goblin. Very interesting method of construction for the Vampire. De Havilland, of course, through the likes of the Mosquito, had a lot of experience of wooden airframes. The Vampire structure has a mixture of wood and metal. That fuselage pod up front has a core of balsa wood with layers of birch veneer, both inside and out. The wings, the tail booms and the tail itself are 1945, just too late to see service in World War II, but in the early post-war years, aircraft like this notched up a whole raft of firsts, including one by our greatest ever naval test pilot, Captain Eric Winkle-Brown. He used a modified Vampire 1, the first RAF unit to bring the Vampire into service, and in 1946, to commemorate the previous year's victory in World War II, its Vampires made the first ever flypast over London by jet aeroplanes. The 247 Squadron was part of a wing of Vampires at RAF Odium in Hampshire. One of the other units was number 54 Squadron, and some of its Vampires in 1948 became the first ever jet aircraft to cross the Atlantic. A lot of achievement for this little aeroplane. On the front line, the Vampire FB5 fighter bomber came into RAF service in 1949. They served both at home and abroad. RAF units flew them in West Germany, in the Middle East and the Far East. They were used in counterinsurgency operations against Malayan terrorists. And then came the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron was one of them. It took 62 Vampires, which were flown by 2 squadrons and a training wing, and they used them between 1949 and 57 for ground attack, air defence and advanced training. This is actually an ex-Swiss Air Force Vampire FB6 single-seater. The historical squadron also has a 2-seat T-55 model. with the Vampire, a man whose jet experience spans the generations, from early generation Vampire and Lockheed getting into the air, one of the great favourites of any Duxford air show, the Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, named Sally B. Present. And on the walkway up towards the American Air Museum can be seen a glass sculpture, a glass wall entitled Counting on British Soil and the End of World War II in Europe in 1945. And the scale of those losses, when you see them depicted in that way with the silhouettes of each of the aircraft concerned, is really quite humbling. It's in tribute to all of those servicemen and more on the Allied side, to which tribute is paid by the sole...
those people will have seen will probably have been those stars of the silver screen. And some of them, in fact, became locals because Clark Gable, probably the most famous, possibly the most famous actor of all time, back in 1939 when he was in Gone with the Wind, suddenly he is based here in East Anglia. And Jimmy Stewart as well, of course, was another man who became part of the 8th Army Air Force. Most of those guys, you have to remember, were only 1920, and the action took part in the skies over Europe.
It's absolutely crucial. As we were saying earlier, you can sign up today and do your bit to help keep this aircraft flying by going to their stand, which when the B-17 parks up, again after the end of this display, is situated at org.uk. But whatever, it is one of the great causes in historic aviation, and long may this aircraft continue to fly. Now we're getting our aircraft for our next formation into the air with the Bristol Blenheim first off. Then we've got two Westland Lysanders and the Gloucester Gladiator. The B-17 on its downwind leg there over the tail of the Chilterns. I'm talking, Colin, about the losses sustained by the B-17s. We need to remember this aircraft was named the Flying Fortress when it first appeared in 1935 because it was seen to be an incredibly heavily armed bomber for the day. Well, that armament increased from 5.5-inch machine guns, including just one in the nose turret on the B-17C models, which were some of the earlier ones to deploy, to 13 machine guns on B-17G models like this.
Yes, originally there was the belief that it would be able to protect itself, hence the name the Flying Fortress, but as I was saying a few moments ago, the German Air Force quickly determined where the weak spots, and the losses, together with the support of, particularly the support of the P-51 fighters, the losses gradually were reduced.
Flying Sally B for us today, Dutchman Peter Kuipers and co-pilot Darryl Taplin. A quite beautiful display from them. And as ever, Peter keeping the tail wheel off the ground.
Well, you've got to say...
Formation be quite a treat in future. of history's notable aircraft. But as the RAF's new monoplane fighters, the Spitfires, Hurricanes, Bolt and Paul Defiants and so forth were delayed, the RAF decided it needed an interim fighter, and Gloucester's new design, which they had named the SS-37 and had made a very early public appearance at the 1935 Royal Review of the RAF here at Duxford, seemed to fit the bill. It entered service with number 72 Squadron in February 19, flew them in Orkney in defence of the naval base at Scapa Flow. Areas along the south coast, rather boring work for their pilots. But, Colin, anything but boring were the missions undertaken by Lysander in support of the SOE, the Special Operations Executive.
Yes, Churchill set the mission for the SOE to set Europe ablaze. And
that's the title of Hugh Verity's memoir about his time as an SOE pilot, maybe with just a few flares lit to mark the strip.
Exactly, and very often the agents would be captured and the signals would go back to England, and the Germans would be waiting for these, because obviously they clearly had to get away quickly.
And here's the last of our Mercury-engined aeroplanes running through solo now, the Bristol Blenheim. Light bomber for the Royal Air Force. As such, they changed the design a bit. They decided to give it a mid-mounted wing and more powerful versions of the earliest, followed by the Hawk 75, the Wildcat and the Hurricane 1. That's the most famous by RAF fans, was that on the 4th of July 1941, when a number of Blenheims of Bomber Command conducted a daylight raid on the German port city of... Squadron, which was reformed here in October 1939 in efforts to help protect Channel shipping, went on to convert to Spitfires in the spring of 1940, and we've got two later war ex-222 Squadron Spitfires in our Spitfire finale, MH434 of the old Flying Machine Company and MH415, a new restoration operated by history. In they come, the Supermarine Spitfire 1A, leading the Curtiss Hawk 75A1, Grumman Wildcat and Hawker Hurricane 1. British and American fighters of that period. Hurricane 1 then breaking off, leaving the Spitfire 1A, the Wildcat and the Hawk orbiting in front of us. models performing individually for us, starting off with the Hurricane 1. And here we see an aircraft that really represents the transition very well between the biplane and monoplane fighter eras, because Hawker's Sydney Cam had conceived a hugely successful line of biplanes.
And I suppose it gave me an inborn fear of it. It took me quite a lot of hours to get over that. But a lot of other people, like James Card, were doing what we call Oswald twistles and things like that with the aerodrome. First flight. It took
a target, and it was at this time that Unternehmen Seelöwe, Operation Sea Lion, was prepared the invasion of the UK. One of the Luftwaffe's key objectives being to knock out the RAF. But the Royal Air Force, not least in the form of Fighter Command, would be a formidable opponent. So it was on the 10th of July 1940 that what is now recognised as the Battle of Britain officially began. That first phase taking in coastal objectives, channel shipping. The Germans inspected by the Air Officer Commanding No. 12 Group on the 22nd of that month, and before long it was ready to go into action. But not before. It had been visited on the last day of July 1940 by His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, who visited dispersal areas at Duxford and had the flight commanders presented to him, along with the senior Czechoslovak officers of this new unit. Then came another ceremonial occasion on the 6th of August. The first patrol by the newly formed unit took place from Duxford on the 18th of August 1940. At 20 to 6 that evening, a large number of German aircraft were engaged in bombing objectives in the area of the Thames estuary. The squadron was ordered off to patrol the area around North Weald in Essex below the cloud base. They landed back having not sighted firearm on display here for the first time now, and with two mighty pieces of Warsaw Pact era rotary wing equipment from the Czech Air Force. The MIL Mi-35 leads the MIL Mi-171 SH. The Mi-171 is in turn an export version of the Mi-17, also a product of the country. Was split into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the Czech Air Force, for many decades. Bringing them in from either end of the display line for an initial crossover, Mi-35 from the left, Mi-171 from the right. From the 221st Helicopter Squadron, the HIP from the first time that we've ever seen Warsaw Pact era combat types in action at a Duxford air display in service with a military air arm. This is a really innovative, spirited two-ship display of these two different types, but which very much operate, often provided for such operations by the Hind. Now they come into the hover at the display center point for the carousel part of their display, rotating at 360 degrees, head on to one another. saw-packed armed advance across the North German plain into the rest of Western Europe had the cold rear loading ramp in their salute to you. MI-171 that we see here, one of the latest developments in a hugely successful line of mill, which was built to the tune of more than 17,000 examples, the largest and longest production run of any helicopter in history and still counting, used across the Soviet Union for military and civil roles throughout the Soviet sphere of influence as well. The Mi-17 was given more powerful versions of the Klimov TV3 turboshaft engine. In excess of 12,000 of those, including Mi-171s like this, have been built. Czechoslovakia flew both the 8 and the 17. The Czech Air Force now operates Mi-171s that were built new by the Ulan-Ude factory in Russia. First order as far as the Czech hips are concerned. That rear loading ramp having replaced the previous clamshell doors. Lifting off again after that touch and go landing. Type able to carry 24. With co-pilot Captain Martin Miensil and flight engineer warrant officer Jan Suchanek. In the hip, meanwhile, pilot Captain Tomas Svoboda, co-pilot First Lieutenant Tomasz Dostal, the flight engineer is Warrant Officer Lumir Vashinka, and the door gunner was Warrant Officer Radek Nezvadba. Display, but now the two coming in for landing, and really some historic moments over IWM Duxford. I've wanted to see these two shapes over this skyline for so many years, and I'm delighted that it's finally proved possible this year. Saluting their forebears in the wartime Czechoslovak Air Force, especially those who served at RAF Duxford, and very proud indeed to do so, coming into land. The mill Mi-35 and the Mi-171SH of the Czech Air Force.
But it means sitting ducks. And so they reverted back to a German tactic of a finger four, two pairs, leader and wingman each. Here they come through in Vic formation. First, Vic is the leader of the team. Jeff Milson, former RAF fighter pilot, flying Phantoms, later a British Airways A320 Airbus captain. On his right, Mike Vasey, an expert in vintage engines and a private pilot. And on his left, Peter Finch, a man flying a very rare aircraft. So the will get amplified the further you go out along the line. So they have to go and focus not just on their leader, but also on the men 2 or 3 along. Here they come, left or right. Big Vic. serious aircraft such as the Mosquito or indeed the Vampire that we saw later. And so the production of Tiger Moths in the UK went to Morris Motors, the car manufacturer at Cowley near Oxford, and they made 3,400 of these aircraft. Actually nailing it, look how close they are. And now the team will form themselves up into one long line for a fly past.
Its main opposition, as far as Japanese fighters were concerned, was the Mitsubishi A6M0 as used by the Imperial Japanese Navy. And once the tactics for using the Corsair had been perfected, and combat search and rescue missions primarily, 17 of them now still in service with the 221st Helicopter Squadron. And as it comes to the hover, an excellent view of the two stub wings on which can be mounted much of this helicopter's firepower. The 4 AT-6 Spiral radio-guided anti-tank missiles would be carried in 2 each in cylindrical containers on those pylons. You can also carry rockets and automatic grenade launchers, and up front at the business end, the twin-barreled 23mm GSH-23 cannon. Really is one of the last vestiges of the Eastern Bloc days, still in service with the modern Czech Air Force. Types such as the MiG-21, 23 and 29, and the Sukhoi Su-22 having long since been retired in favour of Western equipment. Remaining Hinds are going to go the same way, replaced by the Bell UH-1Y and AH-1Z from next year onwards. Martin Miensil and the flight engineer, Warrant Officer Jan Suchanek, together from the 221st Helicopter Squadron of the Czech Air Force for the last time in the UK with the MI-25 by the Czech Air Force at Duxford this weekend to their forebears who flew from this airfield in 1940. Destroyed during the Luftwaffe's last-ditch Operation Bodenplatte air raid, specifically that on Evere airfield near Brussels on New Year's Day 1945. But Prince Bernhard saw this aircraft in his old markings when Rob Slamplau took it to an airshow at Hilversum in the Netherlands in 1980, and he even flew in it with its then owner. It was based here at Duxford at the time. The aircraft was then put into long-term storage until it was acquired by Dutch warbird pilot Edwin Boshoff in 2020, and from him it was bought by B-17 Sally B E-2 for the US Navy. All sorts of private owners, from Florida to Canada, across North America, came to the UK in the early 1980s for German Peter Kuipers in contrast, while his aeroplane is regularly seen at Duxford, its regular base is Leopoldsburg in Belgium. And this is the first time for 10 years that we've seen a duo of Stagger Wings at Duxford. There are several of you in the crowd who are Duxford Airshow regulars who remember seeing the Prince Bernhard marked Stagger Wing at shows here in the early 80s, so this is a rather nostalgic sight for you as Peter Kuipers brings his Beech D-17S into land. An aeroplane with some quite tricky handling characteristics, the Stagger Wing, for the unwary. Peter very well versed in it now. As is the pilot of the yellow one, Nigel Wilson. He's in Geoffrey Lynch's aeroplane. Nigel, we've seen here displaying the Anglian Warbirds cockpit in the past, Chipmunks and various other aeroplanes. Flight instructor based at Earl's Cone in Essex. Very, very capable display pilot indeed. The two Beech D-17Ss. What's happening now on the flight line. The 16 Spitfires and 4 Hurricanes, all in the process of starting up and taxiing out. Waiting until last to start up the 3 Mark 1A Spitfires. Just because they're the most prone of all these Spitfires to overheating while on the ground, so they'll be getting going last. And it's a magnificent array. Lawrence Matt Spitfires at the Duxford Airshow. It's a different array of them with new restorations, new acquisitions, returnees. There are the Mark 1s firing up on the line. The aircraft that's going to be filling what we call the Joker slot, performing solo while the big formation gets together, is an example of that. The red and silver Spitfire F-14E. The only Griffin-engined aircraft in this formation, or this slot, which is otherwise all still looked after here at Duxford, and this weekend is its first public airshow appearance since it came back to the UK. But there are so many other stories contained within the aircraft we're going to see in this display. Not least 2 of the single-seat Mark 9s, just a few serials apart from one another, of the production line. MH434 from the old Flying Machine Company, many of you know well. But MH415, operated operated from Sywell by Air Leasing and returned to flight last year, is perhaps less so, but they have an incredible amount of shared history. Those two airframes, which are going to be flying together. Both of them flew together from Duxford in 1968 during the making of the Battle of Britain film. Both MH434 and MH415 notched up their maiden missions on exactly the same. There goes the first of the Spitfires, the Joker, the aerial speed icons. Mark 14. The Sea Hurricane 1B of the Shuttleworth collection bringing up the rear, and I shouldn't neglect also to mention one of the most distinctive aircraft in our Spitfire section, the Silver Spitfire, operated by...
Unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict